Hi everyone, my name is Sam Teichelman. This is Yana Shaleva, Christina Gunther, and Flossie Shaleva, and we will be talking about the many different types of compensation used in evaluating managers and paying them for their performance. So when evaluating compensation packages, there are several challenges that need to be considered. For example, managers would like a fixed salary so that they can budget for their personal expenses, while shareholders would prefer to have managers be paid based on their performance, so that managers are encouraged to do everything they can to increase the stock price and shareholder value. Neither of these extremes is really ideal, however, so it is important to find a middle ground when crafting performance compensation packages. Compensation should really be performance-based for one major reason: to align the interests of management with the interests of shareholders. Care must be taken when using this approach, however, because short-term objectives for managers may incentivize them to commit fraud or overstate current or future expectations in order to increase short-term wealth at the expense of long-term performance. So, taking everything in moderation, we will now discuss the many types of compensation used by companies for paying managers, evaluating their effectiveness at promoting long-term performance along the way. To start us off with cash bonuses, here's Yana.
So, cash bonuses are short-term incentive bases that are usually offered in addition to regular salaries. Popular type of bonuses include spot-on bonus, which is given to reward a particularly good performance with cash given right on the spot. Hiring bonus or a sign-on bonus, which is given when you are hired to a new job. Referral bonus when you refer employees to the company, or a retention bonus given for a particular period of time that you stay with the company. In the last decade, a particular type of bonus that has also become increasingly popular is the Golden Hello, and this type of bonus is given to an executive who has been hired away from a rivaling company, and it serves to compensate him for the lost value of stock options that were given to him from his previous employer. The most common type of cash bonuses, however, remains the one that is particularly tied to performance measurement. And while measurement criteria might differ from company to company based on their individual goals and objectives, these performance measurements are generally linked to growing revenue, meeting budgets, increasing sales, exceeding competition, low employee turnover, and so on. At a first glance, it appears that cash bonuses drive management behavior in a positive way and can increase short-term shareholder value. As a general rule, the executive bears large risk if the decisions he takes have a detrimental effect on the company and the company value. And faced with the prospect of repercussions or backlash, he can become quite risk-averse. If, however, the executive gets rewarded with money for decisions that benefit the company, he might be enticed to take more risk that can in turn benefit shareholders. An additional argument that supports the reward of cash bonuses here is that a highly effective executive would be sought after by rivaling companies, and if you don't reward him at your own company, somebody else might and steal him away. And basically, not the corporation or the shareholders benefit from losing a valuable employee with a lot of inside knowledge and valuable knowledge about the process at all. On the other hand, additional research suggests that cash bonuses do little to motivate managers or to increase shareholder value. And the main concern here is that because cash bonus is a short-term incentive, it might entice managers to manipulate financial results, particularly if performance is evaluated on the basis of revenue growth, share prices, cost reduction, or other financial indicators. Another common type of performance-based incentive is stock option. Stock option is a contract that gives the buyer the right to buy a particular number of options for a set price. This is also the contract also must be exercised within a typical time frame that makes them either short-term or long-term incentives. Companies offer stock options for much the same reason as cash bonuses, to motivate managers to perform better, to increase shareholder value, and for them to have an invested interest in the company's performance as a whole. Just as cash bonuses, stock options are also criticized, as they can be seen as enticements for executive, again, to manipulate financial reports and inflate stocks in the short run. Other potential types of manipulation that arise here are setting low strike prices, timing option granting to specific events, and backdating.
So moving away from stock options, I'll be talking about an increasingly popular form of compensation known as restricted stock units, often offered through what's called a restricted stock plan or an RSP. The RSP offers company stock to management as compensations with restrictions on the final stock award. Restrictions commonly include time-based vesting conditions. So for example, a manager may receive only 20% of the stock after their first year, and then an additional 20% per year after that. It basically encourages the manager to look for the long-term performance of the stock. Stock restrictions can also be tied to specific events in the corporation. For example, a manager may not receive the stock until an initial public offering. Or they can be tied to specific performance measurements that the board believes may actually improve the company. The board of directors has the option to go through and pick and choose the mix that they feel best fits the goals and objectives of the corporation. The benefit of the RSP from a manager's perspective is that even if the stock prices go down, the restricted stock plan still has value. On the other hand, shareholders typically dislike this aspect of the restricted stock plan. Shareholders are looking for compensation that's more closely tied with performance, and if the manager can still receive a benefit even if the stock prices go down, shareholders may not necessarily approve of that. One of the major downfalls from a management perspective is that if the manager chooses to leave the company before they are considered fully vested in the restricted stock plan, they can actually lose the entire benefit of the restricted stock plan. Some managers may view this as basically a set of handcuffs that keeps them at a corporation for longer than they may wish to stay, just so that they can get this particular bonus. In comparison, if you look at stock options, typically if a manager leaves a company and they have stock options that are available to them, they'll be given a certain amount of time to go through and exercise those options at the end of their tenure. In order to make sure that this type of performance-based incentive is effective, it's very important that the board goes through and chooses the correct mix of performance measurements that fit the goals and objectives of the company.
Stock appreciation rights, or SARs, are similar to a stock option in that they involve the company making a cash payment to management based on increases in the stock price. For example, if a CEO is given a base salary of $250,000 per year and an additional 10,000 SARs, then at the end of the year, if the stock has increased from $15 to $20, he will be entitled to an additional $50,000 in compensation. This example highlights two key risks with the SAR. First, if all of the SARs are coming due in the current year, it doesn't truly tie managers' compensation to long-term performance. Secondly, if all the SARs are coming due in the current year, there's a much higher incentive for management to overstate performance, to commit fraud in order to falsely increase the value of their rights. So there's a couple of easy ways to mitigate these risks, and that is by spreading the vesting dates over many years to tie it to long-term performance, and staggering the vesting dates so that the CEO and CFO receive their rights on different years. Since they both have to sign off on financial statements, this will keep them from joining up and saying, hey, let's really overstate our earnings this period to maximize our SARs. Since this is a cash-intensive bonus if stock prices go way up, especially in growing companies, SARs are most effective for mature companies with stable and sufficient cash flow. Phantom stock is similar to the SAR in that it is a cash bonus paid related to the stock price. If a CFO receives 10,000 phantom stock units and at the end of the year the stock price of the company is $5, the CFO will also be entitled to $50,000 in compensation. However, one unique feature of phantom stock is that it can accrue dividends as if the manager actually owned the stock. So in the CFO's case, he would have 50,000 plus the applicable dividends from the year. The benefit to the shareholders is that the company is paying out actual cash rather than stock, so it does not dilute the voting interest of the pre-existing shareholders. One benefit to the company is that they're not issuing stock, so they can avoid filing time-consuming and costly reports. Phantom stock is similar to SARS in that it is most effective for mature companies with stable cash flow, and that it can promote long-term performance while preventing fraud when vesting dates are spread over many years and staggered between key executives.
Okay, so this brings me to non-qualified deferred compensation, which typically divests of retirement plans and are very similar to deferred compensation programs, which is really just a larger umbrella term for 401ks. One of the drawbacks, though, of 401ks is that there are annual caps to how much a participant can contribute into their fund. And from an employer perspective, there's a lot of actuarial reporting involved to ensure compliance with IRS and ERISA guidelines. So where these types of compensation plans become more effective is that to comply with tax law, they're considered informally funded. The employer doesn't set aside any funds, and the employee doesn't really own anything. It's really just an agreement, a promise made by the employer to pay the employee back at a later time. This allows a lot of leeway for the employee because they get to choose how much of their income is deferred each year, which is an advantage over the 401ks because there's no cap. In addition, they can invest that money and it accumulates tax-free, and all the money they earn is tax-free until they get the full amount returned. Debt-based compensation is another slightly up-and-coming incentive plan used in a lot of companies. An example would be AIG. After the credit crisis in 2008, AIG tied 80% of executive compensation to the price of junior bonds. And the motive behind it was to motivate the executives to act and grow the company in a way that reduced corporate debt, but increased bond prices and kept them at a premium. And proponents of this theory and the authors of the article that we used in our research believe that doing so increases lender confidence, and when the lenders feel more confident about their investments, they're likely to give less restrictive loan covenants, which allows managers to take calculated risks. This keeps them from steering too far in the direction of being too cautious, like being afraid to rock the boat, not diversifying and creating new options for profitability, but also keeps them from taking unnecessary gambles, which again the authors believed is more likely to happen when a management share in a company is only tied to equity. From a corporate governance standpoint, this brings a whole new share of considerations that the directors had to take in mind when they're crafting compensation packages. There isn't so much of a gap between stakeholder and shareholder perspective in this situation, though, because reducing corporate debt and increasing corporate value are both goals that the whole company would want to accomplish, and it's important for the board of directors to take that into consideration when crafting them.
As we've hopefully shown through these examples, the problem of mitigating the agency cost issue and making sure that management acts in the best interests of shareholders can be extremely complicated. Each type of performance-based compensation that we talked about has examples where it's been used to minimize the agency costs, but also has examples where it's been abused by managers who only found loopholes in order to get this type of compensation. The board of directors needs to closely examine the needs and goals of the company on an individual basis to determine the best mix of incentives for their own company. Ultimately, the final question that needs to be asked with all types of performance-based compensation is, does it work? Unfortunately, there will never be a one-size-fits-all approach to executive compensation that will work for all corporations. Boards need to be sure to exercise their due diligence in researching all the options and choosing the options that best incent the managers to work with the interests of the shareholders and the corporation in mind. Compensation is always going to be an extremely important factor to managers and to corporations. To quote the movie Wall Street, greed, for the lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right, greed works. The eternal challenge will always be how to make greed work for the benefit of the management, for the shareholders, and for the board. Thank you.
Are there any questions, Moody?
Yes.
So you guys talked about at the end about finding the right mix. What do you guys do? What you saw and what you researched? What do you think is a better mix of mixing up the different types of compensation that managers can be provided? Do you think it matters based on company size or company culture? What do you think is the best mix, and how is that determined, kind of?
I'll take a shot at it. I think the managers need to have some kind of a fixed salary. And then for growing companies, since they're a little tight on cash, it's almost always seen, and it works pretty well, that they have a more stock-based compensation. So the stock options, the restricted stock plans, because they can afford that. You know, if they take the cash and pay out a big phantom stock bonus or a big cash bonus because performance is good, that could really cut their liquidity down, and it could slow the growth. So smaller companies, you see a lot more in the stock. There's some, you know, sometimes you'll have a little cash bonus if they've got extra sitting around. But most of the time, your cash bonuses are going to be seen in the mature companies with lots of shareholders already.
Do you see any issue with fairness in terms of heavily incentive-based, like stock or debt-based compensation when it comes to like broad market sell-off? For example, like oil and gas is sold off a ton. There's still companies that are making money and doing well. It's not really their fault that the entire industry or sector is being sold off. Do you see any fairness issues with them being penalized because their stock price goes down for factors outside their control?
Take it.
I was gonna say, I think the important part of that is that they have the appropriate mix. Companies like that may choose to move away from options that may choose to move away from compensation that's tied directly to stock prices. If they know stock is extremely volatile, they may stretch compensation out over several years or try to figure out a way that might smooth out some of those inconsistencies. So I think that's why it's important for the board to make sure that they really understand the corporation and the environment that the corporation's working in to make sure that the compensation works the best.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.